Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of Mission Talk, where we talk everything missions from across the street to around the world. And now we are going to travel 2,300 miles northwest to South Seattle, Washington. I have here with me today church planter Dave Atkins. Dave, how you doing?
Good. How are you, Jacob?
Oh, I'm doing great. So I was excited because I got to talk to you on the phone a little bit a couple days ago, and that was the first time we had any interaction. Right. So since then, I've been doing a little research as far as what you and your wife, Brenda, are doing there in Seattle. So I'm just as excited as anybody else watching about getting to know a little bit about you personally, your background, and what led you and what you are doing there in Seattle today. So can you tell us just a little bit about your family?
Jacob, thanks so much for having me on. And I love what the Wilmington Home Church is doing, the whole idea of the online pastor, and good for you guys thinking ahead and being proactive. And this is awesome. So thanks for the opportunity. I was thrilled to be able to get to jump on with you today. My family, many of you will know them because we've been around the home church for quite a while. I actually got our picture down off the wall. Of course, here's Brenda. And Brenda and I have been married for, goodness, almost 35 years now.
Congratulations.
And we have three kids, Emily, who's the oldest, Tabitha, and Noah. Now, Noah was our child that was born in Taiwan, so we call him, he's made in Taiwan, right? So Emily and Tabitha are both married. Emily is married to David, and they have Silas. And now just 2 weeks ago, we had our second grandchild, a boy, and his name is James Gabriel.
Congratulations.
And, exciting. Now, Silas is 6 now, so he calls me Papa Dave, and I love that. Love being a grandpa. And Tabitha's husband is Brian. Emily and David and their family live in the Champaign-Urbana area of Illinois, so central eastern Illinois. Brian and Tabitha, they live in Houston, and she and Brian down there for about the last 2 years. They moved there from Chicago. She does law, so she's an attorney. And our son Noah, who's 21 now, stayed on in Michigan when we moved out here. His hopeful outcome is to be a flight attendant, but of course with the pandemic, all of that shut down. And he's the manager of a Chinese restaurant. So he's the front end manager for them, and he's the only one in the business that's bilingual. So that just fits him really well. He of course loves Chinese food, and he can communicate with the cooks and all back in the back in Chinese. So he speaks Chinese every day, still using it, waiting for the day, hopefully, that the airlines will start hiring again and he can go off and fly the world again. Of course, he grew up traveling the world. So that's our family. And they're all doing well. Thank you. Brenda, I would say, I'm sorry she can't be with us today, but this is really cool. She, about 3 months ago or so, she began subbing, substitute teaching, because she's a teacher by vocation. And she began subbing in the Kent Valley, where we moved to, South Seattle. And she began substitute teaching. Well, she got into the classroom in a permanent substitute position for special needs kids. And I'm not sure I'm saying that correctly, but anyway, she was in a classroom with special needs high school students. And she impressed them so much that the office manager position for the Auburn Riverside High School, which is a high school for about 1,800 students with 100 teachers. They approached her and interviewed her for the office manager position for that school. And pretty unheard of that somebody goes from a substitute teacher one day to the office manager the next day. And that's really what she did. She started Monday in that position, and they welcomed students back yesterday, so Tuesday. So they threw her into the deep end, and so far she's loving it. But it's just another example of God opening doors here. So I'm sorry that Brenda couldn't be with us. Anyone who knows Brenda knows that is missing her in this interview because she really is our better half.
So you told me the other day, you told me she was doing that, and congratulations to her if she's watching this later. But you told me the other day that our church here in Wilmington, Ohio is kind of like your home church.
Yeah.
You have a lot of connections here. For those who might not know you on that personal basis, can you kind of give a background as how you're connected to our church here?
Yeah. So we moved to Wilmington when I was in about the 6th grade, and this is back in the mid-'70s. And my grandparents, and most probably won't remember them, but Clarence and Dorothy Smith lived out in Port William. And so we moved there to Wilmington. My dad was a nurse, and so he got on at Clinton Memorial Hospital and was a supervisor there. And my mom went to work for Baum and Carl's in the bakery, decorating cakes, because she was a cake decorator. So we moved there and promptly joined the Wilmington church. Unfortunately, within about a year after that, my parents divorced. And Dad, just one day came home and packed up and left. And back in that day, divorce was not common. And in a small town, that kind of news travels fast. And so I just like any child that goes through that, I had a kind of a meltdown, I guess. And the home church there, Wilmington, full of just great people, loved on us and just kept loving on us through my middle school years and high school years. Just kept loving us. Now, back then, we didn't have a youth minister. We didn't have Tony. We just had, youth sponsors. We had Bible Bowl. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Bible Bowl, but
yes,
Wilmington had great Bible Bowl teams back in the mid-'70s and later. And so I joined the Bible Bowl, and we got to travel to North Americans. I remember my first one when I was like 7th grade, and really, the youth sponsors were struggling with me. That's a fair statement. But Denver, we got to travel by train to Denver for the North American. We traveled to Oklahoma City by train for the North American to compete in Bible Bowl and things like that. And of course, the youth group was great. Ron Merkel headed that up. But back in the 6th grade, Mabel Merkel was our 6th grade boys teacher. And she would ask questions, and it would seem that maybe I would have an answer, or at least I would be willing to talk, right? And so one day she pulled me aside, and I thought, oh, I'm in trouble. I really am. She pulled me aside and she said, David, and when the preacher's wife pulls you aside, and it's like God speaking to you. And she pulls me aside and she said, David, you need to be a preacher someday. Now, then my family blew up. And I don't think anybody said that after that. David, you need to be a preacher someday. I did everything I could to rebel. I was angry at God, and I was maybe I could say I was angry at the church as a whole, because my dad had grown up in the church, and he'd even gone to Bible college for a year or so, um, I just couldn't. I could not. It didn't register. I couldn't understand how anybody, who believed in God or believed in the church, was part of the church, could do that, right? We were poor, and over and over again, the church helped us out. I remember Christmas presents when there weren't going to be any, and trips that the youth group or Bible Bowl would go on that we didn't have money for, that somehow the money would just be there for that, right? And so they just loved on us, and every time I tried to pull away, they just held on even tighter and wouldn't let go of me. And love conquers hate. And I was just filled with, I could say, hate. So I should add to that, and this is an interesting part of that, which I don't know that many people in Wilmington know, but I was adopted when I was born. And so I found out later, actually, that my birth mother was in the abortion clinic on 2 separate occasions to abort me there. And she was a citizen of Canada, actually right up the road in Vancouver. And my maternal grandmother was the one who was going to pay that abortion bill. And when my birth mother could not go through with the abortion on 2 different occasions, she finally put her on a bus, and she took a bus all the way down the Pacific coast and ended up in San Diego, where eventually I was born and then adopted. So I felt like I'd been abandoned twice, and I was adopted twice. And the first was by my parents that adopted me and raised me in the church, which I'm forever grateful for. But then I was adopted by the Lord and by the family of God. And the Wilmington church really became my family. Like the Vances, they're still there today. The Villers, Troy Villers preaches up the road in Sabina, right? Well, I spent most of my time out at the Vance farm getting in trouble. And with Troy Villers and people like that. So that's my background. And then there's another aspect of that too. Maybe we'll talk about calling maybe in a minute, but that's my background. I grew up there and just have great memories of my home church.
David, this is the first time I'm hearing your testimony about what happened, but something I love that you said is how loving the church was to you during that time. And although you might have felt like you wanted to rebel, that calling from God, he was showing you all along what true Christians look like and using them in your life to help prepare you for your future.
Yeah, there was a real tug of war going on, Jacob, in my life. There was that calling, which again I took to be the voice of God, that calling and the love of God's people, fighting a war with the destructive nature of hate and the disintegration of the family and all of those other things, and even the baggage of the past as far as being adopted and that feeling of having been abandoned, that I couldn't verbalize back then, but I know now that's really what it was. It was just those feelings of those abandonment issues, because you hear about latchkey kids, right? Yep. Well, that's what we became. And of course, we lived out west of Wilmington on 22, west of Naylor's Furniture out there. Is Naylor's still there? Naylor's Furniture?
Naylor's Furniture is still there, yes.
Okay, so just west of there, R&L Transfer actually had one of their first big, their first big depot actually was out there just west of Naylor's. And then there was this, and I don't even know if it's still there today, but there was this rundown trailer park, and there was a honky tonk bar in front of it. And that's where we lived. And so when you talk about growing up on the other side of the tracks, that's kind of really what it was like. And we became latchkey kids, and that just led to that, those feelings of abandonment. And so, yeah, there was a real tug of war going on in my life there. And I think most people probably weren't sure who was going to win at the time, and I pushed everybody's buttons. I'm telling you, Jacob, if you talk to anybody who knew me growing up, they will tell you that I pushed everybody's buttons and tested grace over and over and over again.
David, this is probably this next question is more probably a continuation of your story. You've been in the ministry for over 3 decades, correct? Mm-hmm. 3 decades now. Like I said, this is probably more of a continuation of your story. Can you tell us about how you started going towards that calling?
Well, yeah. So I graduated in '81 from Wilmington High School, and I said, well, Lord, I don't see myself in ministry. Again, I was still very angry. I was still an angry young man, and I didn't resolve that until later on in the end of my freshman year of college, actually. But I said, Lord, I don't see any way that I'll ever be a preacher, but everybody else went to Cincinnati. At one time, Wilmington had something ridiculous, crazy number, like 17 students from the home church there at Cincinnati Bible College back then. And so I followed all of those people that I looked up to, the Johnson, Tony and Joni Johnson, and Jim Esmel, and all the Vances, Ron and John Vance. And I followed all of them. And Troy and I, we went to Cincinnati Bible College together. And again, I wasn't sure at all that that's where God would want me, but I went, and so at some point, and this is part of this, the guys on my floor, right? So we lived in the dorm, and the guys on my floor basically did an intervention, I guess they would call it today. They did an intervention, and they came into my room, and these were all the upperclassmen, and they said, we don't know what your problem is, but you have an issue, and we're sick of it. Either you get help, or we'll help you. And what they meant was they were going to beat the snot out of me. I said, wait, you guys are all studying to be preachers. And they said, yeah, but we're not going to put up with this stuff, because my goal was to make everybody as miserable as I was. And I put people down and just cut on them all the time, was really negative. And so anyway, they made an appointment for me to talk to Dr. Goebbels, who was our psychology professor. And so, they made the appointment. I had to show up. It was either show up to Dr. Goebel, or they were going to show up in my dorm room again. And so anyway, I made an appointment with him, and we talked over a period of weeks, I think. And basically it was, I'd never forgiven my dad. Right. And so we talked through that and what that meant. And that even though none of us deserve forgiveness, right? None of us deserve it. Nevertheless, God grants it through grace, through Jesus Christ. And so I realized I had to let go of that anger and give it to the Lord. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And so, I said, Lord, I don't know how I'm going to do this either, but I realize I can't begin to love people. I can't be in ministry while simultaneously holding on to anger and bitterness and so forth. And so actually, my stepmom and my dad lived in Blanchester, and I went over and spent a Saturday with him, ironically mending fences in the back pasture. And I just said, Dad, I want you to know I forgive you. And from there on, the Lord began to use that background of having grown up in that kind of a family. In fact, that summer I went to a week of church camp and on staff, and back then, and we're talking early 80s, divorce was becoming more and more common, and so they said, does anybody have any experience dealing with divorce? And nobody did on the whole faculty. And here I am, like the youngest, like 19 years old. And so finally, after pleading, the dean of the week said, come on, I need somebody, because we got like half a dozen kids here this week whose families are splitting up this summer. Some were actually using camp, sending their kids to camp, and when the kids got home from camp, their parents were going to be separated. And so he said, I need somebody who understands what these kids are going through to just love on them. I said, oh, that's what my home church did for me. I think I could do it for them. And so I raised my hand and I said, well, my parents divorced when I was their age. And you know what he said? He said, good, you've got them. And that, of course, made me angry. There's nothing good about that, right? But then by the end of the week, and loving on those kids and giving them hope, which is what I really did. I don't know that I gave them anything brilliant or anything like that, but God used that, and that set my life, my course, as far as maybe God does have a place for me in full-time ministry. And so, haven't looked back since.
Did you meet your wife in college, or how did you and Brenda meet?
Yeah. So I graduated and ended up accepting a call as an assistant minister out in Charleston, Illinois, which again is on the central eastern side of Illinois on the plains. Okay. In Illinois, and Brenda was a student at Eastern Illinois University. So she was a junior, and that's where Eastern is, in Charleston. And so Brenda came to church, and I was responsible. She visited, and I was responsible for college age on down. And so when she came, like any dutiful young associate minister, I did my due diligence and called on her. That's what we did back then. We called, and I just kept calling, and finally she got tired of me and decided to marry me.
You wore her down.
I did. I wore her out.
How long were you? How long were you on staff there?
So we were in Charleston for 3.5 years. And a church opened up down in southern Illinois, and think Appalachia, really, in southern Illinois. And it was a great church, a great country church, almost 200 years old by then, and Pleasant Ridge. And so it was a preaching position, and the preacher in Charleston that I served under, Jack Howard, Jack and Peggy, were just awesome. They were cut from the same mold the Wilmington church people were, loving on you. And he was like a father figure to me, said this would be a great church. And so recommended me for that. And so we moved down to southern Illinois, and I began preaching full time. And that was back when you did Sunday morning service and Sunday night service and a Wednesday evening service. And it was back then, that was about the time that Don Boffman, who was a missionary from the home church there, was a Living Link missionary back when I was growing up in Wilmington. That was about the time that Don Boffman was killed in Nigeria, Africa. And so that led to that led to our adventure overseas.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on into your adventures overseas. Let's talk about your calling and your time in East Asia.
Yeah. So like I said, Don Boffman was like a living link to my home church when I was growing up. And he was one of those people that you didn't mess with. I mean, like I said, I pushed everybody's buttons, but not his. Most of the time it was because he carried around a boa constrictor snake. Now, I don't know how he brought it from Africa, but every time they came back, he would bring a boa. And I don't remember what he called him. I call him Betty. But anyway, he would be teaching a class like at church camp or vacation Bible school or one of our Sunday school classes, whatever. And if you were rambunctious, if you were talking too much or fidgety, which I was all of the above, he would come over and he would just very quietly, he was a soft-spoken man anyway, he would just take Betty off his shoulders and put him on your shoulders and say, shh, Betty doesn't like it when you fidget and talk too much. It worked. I mean, I think I followed him around like a puppy dog, really, mostly because I just thought his snake was cool and the stories were really neat. And I had a paper route back then, and I would send some money, not much, $1 or $2 sometimes to them, and they would send me a postcard from Africa, really cool. I saved those. I don't know where they are now, but I saved those for a long time. The coolest thing was that when I was at Cincinnati at Bible college, he came to speak, and he actually requested that I be the one that introduced him in chapel, which was
what an honor.
so cool. Yeah. And I think that's the last time I saw him, because then I graduated, went off to Illinois, and then in '89, I believe, he was killed by bandits that had come from outside of the area and were trying to rob them. But anyway, in 1990, and this goes to, we just moved down to Pleasant Ridge Church to start preaching. We went to the North American Christian Convention. I think it was in Kansas City. I believe so, Kansas City. And a preacher got up in a main service and said, held up a pair of shoes and described a man. And finally, he said at the conclusion, now who's going to fill Don Boffman's shoes? And I looked over at Brenda and I said, did you hear that? Because I just felt the Holy Spirit saying, you know it's you, right? And I didn't know how. I had no experience in missions. I'd been on a couple of trips to Haiti and things like that, but I had no experience in missions. So that was 1990. And along about that time, we had a speaker from Lincoln Christian Seminary graduate school. The president of the school came down to speak at Pleasant Ridge, and we hosted him for a week. And finally, Charles McNeely, and he gave me a scholarship to go to Lincoln, and it was 3 hours one way. But I did, I would drive up and maybe spend the night and take a couple classes and come back down. I did that for about a year. The drive was killing me, though, especially in winter. And so we decided to make a move, and we moved up to Central Illinois near Champaign-Urbana, and I took a church there. And we began to explore missions. And the other missionary that I'd gotten to know in high school at Butler Springs was a guy named Doug Lucas. And of course, Doug was just getting ready to go to Uruguay, and he had not yet started Team Expansion. But their headquarters, it ended up at Cincinnati Bible College on the campus. And so we began to talk to Team Expansion, because their mission was to plant churches among unreached people groups. And I thought it would be so cool to be able to share the gospel with people who had never heard it. I had the opportunity to do that in Russia, and it just was amazing. And so we just said, where do you need missionaries? And they said, would you consider Taiwan? And so we were already hosting international students by then from the University of Illinois, many of them from Taiwan. So we'd made a bunch of relationships already. And the first person I told about Taiwan was Wilmington Church of Christ and Art Merkel. And they were the elders, and the church was behind us 100%. They were the first church to basically endorse us and even did a video for us. And we went in '96 on an internship for the summer, a month of the summer, to Taiwan just to check it out. And then we moved there I graduated from Lincoln, I guess I should say, with a master's in church growth and missions. So I spent like 3 years doing that part-time. And in '95 and '96, we went to Taiwan, and then we began to do our support raising after we came back in '96. And then we moved there. We got off the plane July 2nd, 1998. Our daughters were in just getting ready to start fourth grade and second grade.
Wow. So stepping off the plane with a family of 4 by then, what were some of the major cultural differences you noticed immediately that you had maybe a hard time adjusting to, or?
Yeah, well, the biggest one was the language, Jacob. I mean, everybody speaks Chinese, right? And we didn't know any Chinese really. And so you go from being a preacher who makes his living communicating, basically, to basically not being able to communicate anymore, probably not even as well as a 2-year-old, right? And so the biggest barrier was the language barrier off the bat. And then, of course, we moved into a big city, and you're taking a country boy from Wilmington, Ohio, and putting him into one of the most densely populated places on the planet. And the city never sleeps. And so the noise of the city would be ringing in your ears nonstop. And so there was that. And then, of course, food, everything was different. And culturally, you had to learn what you can and can't do, what's good luck, what's bad luck. You don't want to, like, for instance, one would be you never use a red ink pen, especially to write someone's name, because that's like a death sentence. So those kinds of things you have to learn because you don't want to alienate yourself from the culture right away. But you start language school almost immediately. We got an apartment. We lived in a big apartment building, thousands of people. There were more people living in that one little apartment building than lived in the town that we came from in Illinois. We lived in a town of about 1,500. There were more people in that one apartment complex than were in the town that we moved from. And so just beginning to build relationships. I had somebody found out I played golf, and so I got invited to play golf, and that was cool. And but you begin language school, and I don't know what your picture is of a language school, but most of it is like one-on-one or one-on-two, and it's in a small room, and you're just learning the language each day at a time. You're learning, and then you're going out each day and practicing what you've learned. And so let's say I wanted to say, hello, my name is David. Ni hao, wo jiao Zhang Dawei. Dawei is David. Ni Joshua means what's your name, right? And so I would go and find 10 people, and I would practice that. And so I had a route that I would walk every day. And I'm telling you, Jacob, I absolutely butchered Chinese. They would laugh, and they would see me coming and just start laughing because they don't like, okay, what's Dave going to say today, right? And so you develop some great relationships that eventually lead to opportunities to share the gospel. And, one of the families that we led to Christ in our neighborhood, he's Eugene and Tina Tsai. And Eugene and Tina are now in full-time ministry. He actually ended up going to Bible college, and he and Tina are preaching, doing great in a church. But we led that family to Christ, and it was from those, because he actually spoke some English, so that really helped. But I would go find Eugene in the neighborhood, and I would practice my Chinese with him. So it was great. Those were fun days in Kaohsiung. We joined a missionary who had just started planting, and so we joined them because they really needed assistance. I was in charge of the youth program, youth group, and my wife took the children's ministry area of the church. When we went, there were about 15 people. When we left Kaohsiung 5 years later to plant in Taichung, we had a group of nearly 100 people. We had moved 2 different times into new buildings. 5 years, 3 years of that learning Chinese.
Wow.
And, yeah.
So how many churches were you involved with over there? So you said you planted one, and then 5 years later you went to plant another.
Yeah. So we were a part of that church plant. And again, back then, missionaries were taking a year-long furlough often. And Chuck and Kathy Foreman, the lead church planter, they actually did that about the year before we moved up to Taichung. But it was always the plan that we would work with Chuck and Kathy for a few years, learn the language, help build the Kaohsiung Good News Christian Church, and then we would build a team and move up. We didn't know where we were going at that point, but we eventually landed in Taichung, which is the middle city, largest city there in Taiwan, and it now is the second largest city of Taiwan. So it was very much like Kaohsiung, a huge city. And we planted in the south side of the city of Taichung, the fastest growing area of Taichung. And we, as the lead church planter there, we were there for 12 years planting. So we were instrumental in 2 church works there. But when you think about church planting, really what you need to think about is disciple making. And so you're making disciples, but the difference, and sometimes this is lost on the American church, is you're making disciples who can go out then and make disciples. If you just make a disciple and they become a spectator to everything that's going on in the church, you've gained one soul, right? Well, in that culture, who can speak Chinese better, the person that I lead to Christ or me? And the answer, of course, is the person that I just led to Christ. Who has more connections in the community, them or me? Usually them. And so our goal was to make disciples who then can go and make disciples. And so that really is what we did.
That's awesome. How accepting was the local culture of the work you were doing? Was there any pushback, any acceptance?
Usually they overall, Taiwan likes Americans as a whole. So they weren't ever, they're not rude. At least we love the Taiwan culture. We really do. And so very few people were ever just out and out rude to us. Usually they'll just politely nod and then go their own way. Now, if you led a family member to Christ, right, and the patriarch or matriarch of the family was not on board with you leading their son or grandson or something to the faith, they're the ones that are going to get a lot of pushback. And they're going to receive the brunt of their consternation. But usually I did not receive it. that was something that they did internally as a family. So basically, when you led someone to Christ, your goal was to lead the whole family to Christ. Um, and it's like creating a beachhead. Think of it as like World War II. You know, we landed in Normandy, right, and had to create a beachhead to move through France, right? Well, very similarly, our goal would be to meet an individual, create opportunities to then engage the whole family, lead the family to Christ, so that then they might lead their extended family to Christ. Don't think of families here as like families there. When you think family there, you're thinking 3 or 4 generations, and oftentimes they live together even in the same house. Grandma and grandpa, oldest brother and his wife and their family, maybe the younger son kind of thing. But anyway, you may have at least 3 generations living under one roof.
Wow. Well, so my last question, as far as Taiwan goes, I could talk all day about other cultures in Taiwan. What started to shift you and Brenda and your family to eventually come back here to the States?
But yeah, we were finishing our last church plant. Again, our goal had been 10 years to get a church planted there in Taichung. Eventually, it ended up 12 years. But about a year before we were going to be finished. Now, remember, as long as I'm there, because I'm the teacher, I'm the pastor, right? The nationals, the Taiwan leaders that I'd raised up, even when I would ask them to make an important decision as a group of leaders, they would always want to defer to me out of respect. Respect for your teacher, right? Mm-hmm. And so the only way that you can overcome that is by setting the group loose and releasing them, right? And so basically, I set a date and said, okay, in a year from now, we're going to release the church. You're ready. You're ready to fly, And it's kind of like, the eagle, mama eagle dropping her eaglets, and letting them fly, right? Well, so we had to do that. So we began to explore what our options were in the future. And I was a field coordinator for Team Expansion by then. So I was coordinating Japan. So back when they had the tsunami and the earthquake and all that, I was their field coordinator for our teams there. And so I'd been doing field coordinator work. And I thought maybe we'll come back to Louisville and work out of the office. So, or maybe we'll move somewhere else in Taiwan and plant again. But then one of our supporting churches in Detroit called us and said, Detroit is a mission field too, and we're struggling. Now, they were a large church. They reminded me a lot of Wilmington. They were running about 300, 400 at the time, but they had been declining for like 15 years and didn't really know why. And so they said, we need somebody with a missions mindset to come and help us. Now, they didn't really know what that meant. They found out what that meant, but they didn't know what it means to have a missions mindset necessarily. And basically what I did is I listened for a while, and then I began to call out all of the things that were not conducive to church growth. So we might be sitting in a meeting and they'd be ready to make a decision, and somebody would say this, and I would say, that's not going to be conducive to church growth. In other words, that's not going to be conducive to disciples making disciples. And oh, by the way, we're really not making disciples who can make disciples the way we're doing it. We've got to change the way we do that too. So I didn't make a lot of friends, at least in the beginning. But anyway, I transitioned for a fellow that was a lot like Art Merkel, who'd been there for 43 years in pastoring. And I transitioned, we did well. And then it was really like starting a new church. and we had helped to start a fast-growing church just about 20 miles away called 242. And I guess I kind of jumped ahead there, Jacob.
Okay.
You asked me about how we left Taiwan. Like I said, we took about a year, and we helped the church transition well. Also, there was another program that we did, which was Sports and English Camp, which was huge. Let me back up there and say that we had started a camp, and we were leading hundreds of kids to Christ through this week of summer camp. And so part of that was helping get the other team expansion missionaries, helping them take over that program. And it's still going great. In fact, they do 2 weeks now, and they've started a college age sports and English camp there. And so that was something Brenda and I started and did for 10 or 12 years, 10 years before we eventually handed that off. So set the church loose, set those disciples loose, making disciples, who can make disciples, and the sports and English camp. We moved back in 2014. So we were on Taiwan for 17 years in full-time with team expansion for 17 years. And it was just where we moved to Detroit because we felt like that was really where God wanted us to be. Brenda and I, prayed about it and just felt God's calling. It was Detroit. Things were really still rough in Detroit. Mm-hmm. It's really made a comeback in the last 6 or 7 years, just because we moved there.
There's the answer. There's the key.
No. But anyway, we moved to Livonia, which is that west suburb. And so that was in 2014. So we were there for 6 years. And that started a new chapter, I guess. And then I kind of jumped ahead.
Okay. So now like I said, I could talk about Taiwan all day, talk about those adventures, but I'd like to transition now and talk about your calling to South Seattle and the work you're doing with Christian Evangelistic Association, CEA.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what they do and how you got involved and how that transpired?
Yeah. So we, like I said, we in Livonia, in Detroit, where I was pastoring, we made the decision that we were better together with a daughter church that we had helped to plant 15 years earlier called 242, after Acts 242. Mm-hmm. And they had multiple campuses. They didn't have any campuses in Metro Detroit. And so about 2 years ago, we approached them and said, let's talk about merging. And so I led our congregation to merge with 242. And it was like planting a new church, because my role became, they called it community life, which was to recruit and train, prepare teams, our service teams and our small group leaders. And so our teams were the launch team for the new church. So we spent about 9 months preparing 200 people, let's say, to help launch 242 Livonia. And so it was a great experience getting a launch team ready to plant, basically, in essence, a new church there in Metro Detroit. They're going great now. They've gone to 3 services. When our first Sunday that we launched, which was back in February of 2020, right before COVID, we went from a church of 300 to a church of 700 in just about 6 months. So we had some tremendous growth. They've been steadily growing, even through. They have a good online church too, by the way, Jacob. But anyway, they're growing again. Well, in the midst of all of that, Brenda and I are praying and saying, Lord, what's next for us? And out of the blue, we didn't know them at all, but out here, the director of the CEA, which is a Christian church church planting organization for the Pacific Northwest, called. And he said, we've not met, but I've heard you have experience planting churches, and we need veteran church planters out here. Would you and Brenda consider coming out and just checking it out? And now they plant churches throughout the Northwest, including like Alaska, parts of Canada, BC, British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Western Montana. So pretty big reach around the Pacific Northwest. And they said, would you come out, just check us out and see what you think. So we couldn't do it because of COVID, but finally last June, Brenda and I got in the car and we drove for days. We ended up in Portland and in Oregon area, and we have church plants there, and we met church planters. Then we came up to the Seattle area and we met church planters here. The director and his wife live here, George and Dottie Johnson, and they showed us the area. And it reminded us a lot of Taiwan, to be honest. The Kent Valley has 71 different languages spoken in the homes of the students in the school system. 71 different languages in this valley, the valley is basically South Seattle. It's metro Seattle. And when you think Seattle, don't think flat, think pretty hilly, right? And so these valleys form geographical boundaries, if you will. And so this is a long valley running north to south. It's a main corridor for, say, from Seattle down to Portland. Okay, and so we came to this area, and a third of the population is Asian.
Wow.
And it just reminded us of Taiwan, and we realized that this is exactly what God has been preparing us to do. I didn't expect to be going back into church planting in my mid-50s. I really didn't. That was probably one of the bigger barriers for us was I'm in my mid-50s. Why would I, not why would I, but how in the world would God ever want us to do this? But when you think about what church planting is, again, it's about making disciples who can make disciples. We've done that. We know how to do that. And we know how to do it in a culture that may not be receptive to it. And so that describes Seattle.
So where are you at right now as far as the church planting? Because you said you only been there for about a little over 6 months.
Right. Yeah. So oftentimes when you think of church plant, you realize that there's a team. CEA is part of that team, and then they bring around coaches and things like that. They actually have a to-do list of 400 action items that need to be accomplished before you plant a church. Imagine a 400 item checklist, and we're working through that. So we began working through that about 3 months ago, and we're I'm going to say we're about a third of the way through, but we have a strategy to, and what you're doing in pre-launch, is you're building a launch team. Now, just like we had a launch team in Detroit, now when we moved to Taiwan, in Taichung specifically, we didn't have anyone but just our full-time team, our team expansion coworkers. So we had one couple with us. So there were just 4 of us in the launch team. The goal was to build a launch team. So I started small groups in different apartment buildings and things like that. At one time, I had like 6 or 7 small groups going before we ever started the church. And then they kept saying, are we a church? Are we a church? I don't know. Do you want to be a church? And so we'd have these conversations in all these small groups. I would get them together once in a while for little gatherings. And they'd say, wow, this there's like 25 of us, or there's 30 of us, or pretty soon we got up to nearly 50. And they're saying, wow, there's 50 of us. Are we a church? They say, I don't know. You want to be a church? They said, well, we got to do some things if you want to be a church. Like what? Well, some of you need to make a decision to follow Christ first. Okay, we'll do that. And then, well, some of you are going to have to volunteer to teach and do youth and all those kinds of things. Oh, we'll do that. We'll do that. Okay, well, then let's get together and we'll talk about it. So anyway, we launched a church, that way. Well, similarly, we'll be doing that here. But our goal is to build a launch team over the next 6 months of 50 people. All right, 50 people. We'll be going to some of the area churches. Some have already been planted by the CEA, maybe asking them for a seed couple or two and things like that. And then the people that we meet, Brenda teaching or in the school. I joined a golf league, Auburn Golf League. I start that actually today, this afternoon. So I'm going to go out and play golf later. And also I took a tent making job delivering for Amazon. And believe it or not, it's just crazy. I meet so many people and I learned the area, like the back of my hand kind of thing. And so, all we're doing right now is checking off those action items and building a launch team of the goal of 50. And so our goal is to be in like phase, we're already in like phase 1. And so when we talk about launching, we're talking phases, kind of like a rocket launch, how it had the different parts of the rocket and they jettison as they get used up. But there'll be like 5 phases beginning really in March. It began in March. And by February of this next year, we hope to be launched as what you would say would be a church. But in each of those steps, we have real action items that we need to accomplish. So it's a kind of the days of like just hanging out a sign and saying we're launching a church on this date. During COVID, we don't think that would work at all anyway. You do a social marketing campaign and you go door to door and you do dial-ups and all of that kind of thing. That was what they used to do. You don't do that anymore. And so things look different now, church planting in COVID.
The gospel and the message you're bringing has not changed, but the methods definitely have.
Yeah, exactly, Jacob. The methods have changed. The message has not.
Absolutely. So if you could quickly just cast us a vision as far as what we're looking for, or as far as what the vision is for this church and how it will be involved in the community.
Yeah. So there are a lot of issues in Seattle, and many of them have made the national news. We have a homeless issue. We have a racial tension issue, big time. And we see the church as a bridge to many of those issues that this community faces. We believe Jesus really is the answer to those. And so we have a background of bringing different ethnicities together. We've done that. We love doing that. And so that'll be a big part of one of our our core values is that we're better together than we are apart. And I've seen that work over and over again. And so if you need examples, I can give you examples of how that is a beautiful thing. But also dealing with the homeless issue and things like that. There are ministries out here that we'd love to partner with. In fact, one of the church planters with the CEA is building tiny homes. And I would love to see us get involved in that. I'm looking forward to talking to him on that subject soon, actually. But they build those little tiny houses. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Those little
tiny
houses. And because interestingly, just yesterday, the Seattle area and now Tacoma area is passing a new law that says you can't tent camp, which many of the homes have been doing in any public land. Well, guess what? That's huge, because now they're going to start just running them out. No, well, what are they going to do? So we have to help them find ways to live and function in the community, right? So I'd love to see us get involved in something like that. But those are just a couple of the ways that we hope to be involved as a new church.
So, like we already discussed, you and Brenda, you've moved to Seattle in 2020. So you're kind of yes, correct.
No, you're right. This is
2020.
Yeah, we moved in, yeah, I'm sorry. We moved here in mid-September of 2020. You're right. Yep.
Okay. Well, as far as that move goes, and like you said, there's a lot of tension of things that has happened in Seattle last year. How has some of the events of 2020 and COVID-19 not only affected your mission, but also your family?
Well, we learned how to use Zoom like everybody else. We really got good at doing Zoom, right? But as far as church planting goes, and again, church planting is building relationships. Well, that wasn't happening very much. And it's really hard to build a relationship on Zoom. You can sustain a relationship, but it's hard to build that on Zoom. And so making connections with local churches and congregations and things like that has been difficult. But now we're kind of emerging from that a little bit. And so, like, I have a lunch meeting with one of the local pastors today. Well, a month and a half ago, that wasn't possible. So we have a lunch date. I had one last week with another local CEA church planter. And again, those weren't possible. Well, now they are. And so you break bread together, you get to know each other and get to hang out. Join a golf league, which again, they didn't happen last year much, even though golf, was played outside. Most of the leagues kind of took a break. So we're able to go out there and have the meetings that we need to have now that lead to relationships. So that's the biggest thing. And as far as our family goes, I think we're all spread out now. We raised our kids to be, they traveled the world from a very young age. And so they're used to traveling, and we're proud of what they're doing right now, and they're doing well. So we're looking forward to getting back to see our new grandson. We're hoping to make a trip back in May, and we're fine flying. We'll fly back to see them. We both got vaccinated. Brenda and I are both what you call essential workers, right? So we're both vaccinated now. So hopefully make a trip back there.
So David,
did I answer the question? I'm not sure about COVID. Yeah. Things are going well. When things when pressure gets too much, right? Sometimes it does. Brenda and I, our stress relief is to go for a bike ride. Now this is a bicycle ride. We do a little biking. And so we'd find a trail and we'd go for a bike ride, or hop on the motorcycle and go for a motorcycle ride. And you can always take out. So we would maybe find a local restaurant that we could do takeout from, and go and do a destination thing and get takeout and go find a park and eat or something like that. Because again, we didn't have many friends when we moved out here, and it's hard to build friends. But so that's how we would do our stress relief: go for a bicycle ride or go for a motorcycle ride.
So David, as we wrap up here, If anybody watching this decides they want to help support you and Brenda, what are some ways they can do that?
Well, if they're on Facebook, the easiest way would be to go to CEA's Seattle Project.
Mm.
CEA's CE capital C capital E capital A apostrophe S Seattle Project, and like us on Facebook. If they wanted to join our prayer group, that would be really cool. You have to request to join that. It's like a private group. And so they could request to join our prayer group. If they want to financially support us, they can join our resource team, I think is what it's called. Those would be our financial partners, and that's another group. But right now, they can actually go through the CEA's website. It's the cea.org. And then when click on donate and go through, and you can find in a drop down menu, you can find our project, South Seattle, the Atkins, and you can click on that and do online giving, or write a check, and the address is there on the cea.org website. And of course, it has the history. It tells about the history of the CEA. CEA has a great track record planting churches, really amazing, better than just about any church planting organization in the country. And so it's really a great Christian church planting group. They've been at it a long time out here. And fortunately, we have a lot of great examples of church plants and church planters to rub elbows with out here.
Okay, and as always, if anybody's watching this, their contact info and CEA's contact info will be on the screen and in the description for you to easily find. Yeah. David, my last question I always like to ask people is, I'm a big fan of the teachings of the Apostle Paul. And what I love about him is when he prays such specific mission-driven prayers that something specific will happen. So my question for you is, what is something specific we can pray for you and Brenda about?
Yeah. So now that COVID restrictions are kind of relaxing out here, we have a lot more opportunities for strategic encounters, I guess you would say. And so that would be our prayer, that God would lead us to 50 people who would be excited to be a part of a church plant in the Kent Valley, because we're talking, the Kent Valley is like 350,000 people, and it encompasses 3 communities, Renton, Kent, and Auburn. And it's about 20 miles long, it's about 6 miles wide. And so as we prepare to launch in this Kent Valley, we know that we can't do it alone. And so we're praying that God will lead us to people who God would use to be a part of this church plant. So we're praying for 50 people. We're also still in that support raising mode. And so still looking at, churches and individuals like Wilmington, coming along on site along with us. And then if you know people who moved out here, when people watch this video, Jacob, they'll say, wow, I know so-and-so who lives out there in Seattle. I'm going to connect Dave and them together. And so that's how these things happen. I'm always amazed at how God connects his church, right? Or even how God divinely just sends us to somebody who needs to hear the gospel and is ready to receive it. Mm-hmm. And so that's really what we're praying for, just divine encounters and
Yes.
and opportunities. And so, and then just the courage to step up and accept them.
Yes. And if you're watching, you heard it here first. You have a personal invitation to join Dave and Brenda and this mission. And if you know anybody, get in contact with them. I'll also attach Dave's email and their project email to this video, and you can get in contact.
So there's another aspect, Jacob, which I haven't mentioned at all, and that is the Seattle Guest House.
Okay.
So CEA is also asking us to launch what we call the Seattle Guest House, and it will basically be a B&B, a bed and breakfast, for people that want to come to the Pacific Northwest and learn about church planting or be a part of what we're doing out here. To come out and visit and stay a week or whatever, and be a part and see some of the church works that are going on in this area. And of course, it's a beautiful part of the country, right? Well, Brenda and I did that in Taiwan. Our home in Taiwan was big, a big house, and we could sleep a lot of people, and we did. We had groups in all the time, and we loved it. And so Brenda just has that gift of hospitality. That sign was actually on our wall in Taiwan. I made that for her for a birthday, I think. But anyway, it was true. Brenda's Bed and Breakfast, and so we'll be launching that, and there'll come a day where we may need a group or two to come out and help us get that place ready to open. Or a group just to come out and enjoy the Seattle Guest House and learn about church planting. So that's a prayer, because that's going to take some deep pockets. We will be launching a capital campaign probably starting in about June, later this summer, for that project, which will be, again, to buy. And then, and there is an example of this guest house. It's called the Restoration House out on the Northeast. I think it's out in Connecticut. Okay. I'm not sure, but anyway, Restoration House out there. And so they'd like to launch basically the Seattle Guest House, which will have everything to do with church planting. And that's a prayer that God will open hearts and open wallets, and God will provide just the right place at just the right time that will also help us in planting the church here in the Kent Valley.
That's incredible. I tell you, David, thank you so much for taking this time and not only sharing your story, but also sharing how people can get involved. Not everyone is called to uproot like you and Brenda have several times and go places, but everyone is called to be involved in missions somehow. Mm-hmm. And here you just listed are a few ways that people can be involved. And I am so grateful that you could share that with us.
Well, I'm so grateful for the Wilmington Church of Christ and the foundation that it gave me and the love that it gave me. And so the Wilmington Church is always involved in our mission work, because if it was not for this congregation, I would not be where I am today. And that's the absolute truth. So they are involved in this mission work, whether they want to be or not, just simply because they loved on me and never let go. And I will never forget that. And I will always appreciate the love and support we've had from the home church. And I just so appreciate the partnership, continued partnership that they've had, first in Taiwan and now here in Seattle. They've always been a part of what we're doing. And of course, they're always in our hearts.
Well, David, thank you so much for spending this time with me. And hey, now you can go and play some golf.
I'll get there eventually, I hope.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Jacob.
Thank you.